Com cada contração, quanto mais intensa a dor ficava, eu ficava pensando, agora eu vou conhecer meu filho.
And 5 minutes later, we're in a taxi. Taxi driver is very excited because he's waited his whole life to drive a pregnant woman to hospital. His moments arrive.
Eu tô dançando funk, vou até o chão e não aguentei subir, né? Eu falei,
Tinha passado 50 dias sem chuva em São Paulo e aí naquele dia caiu um toró daqueles assim.
Tirar uma calça, tirar outra calça, tirar minha calça. Aí quando eu olhei meu barraco cheio, eu falei, que é isso?
And me and the taxi driver run into the hospital, shouting, "There's a woman about to deliver a baby."
Eu tava sentindo meu corpo e conversando comigo mesma e com o bebê, né? Vamos sair, vai abrindo com cada respiração.
Ai, vou desmaiar não. Tá, acorda.
And then early in the morning, this real person comes out. It's amazing. I know it's what's supposed to happen, but it's still weird.
Life completely explodes when you have a child.
And as soon as he was born, all of a sudden, I didn't matter at all.
No one could have prepared me for this level and this depth of love.
They squall, they scream, they're unpleasant. But then suddenly I had this little being, and it was amazing.
Eu sou o escudo dele, sou a Mulher Maravilha pra ele.
Eu aprendi mais com ele em 2 anos do que eu aprendi na minha vida inteira.
My relationship with my husband after the baby was born. What relationship?
Eu me perdi, eu não sabia quem eu era. Quem era a Gisele, quem era a mãe do Benjamin ou da Vivi.
Aí eu chamei eles e falei, ó, tem uma coisa errada, tipo, não tá legal, eu preciso de ajuda. Eu sabia que falar era a única saída que eu tinha.
E aí, tem dia que você fala, puxa vida, mas eu passei o dia só falando, bah, ah, má.
Finally, men are told, you have to hold your child. You're a loser if you don't hold your child.
A potência do olhar de uma mãe amorosa para um filho e do filho para a mãe é de uma força, de uma magnitude cósmica.
Oftentimes, as societies, we fail to support parents in providing them the support they need for their children.
We're in this together, and we have to support each other so that we can grow healthy children everywhere around the world.
We need to put children at the heart of a compassion revolution to help them learn their own song, their own wishes, their own sense of who they feel they are. These children that come through us are the children of the universe.
Com cada contração, quanto mais intensa a dor ficava, eu ficava pensando, agora eu vou conhecer meu filho.
And 5 minutes later, we're in a taxi. Taxi driver is very excited because he's waited his whole life to drive a pregnant woman to hospital. His moments arrive.
Eu tô dançando funk, vou até o chão e não aguento.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all, depending upon where you are. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like now to hand over to Felicitas to get us started. Thank you.
Good afternoon, good morning. I will follow your lead to greet people in the various timelines that we have. Thank you so much for being here, for having made time. My name is Felicitas Mutimeti, and I am the lead secretariat for the Civil Society Forum on the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. We are excited to be here this afternoon, and particularly for the CSO Forum. The excitement is on 4 levels. The first one is that we are finally solidifying the partnership that we have forged with the Africa Early Childhood Network, the partnership that seeks to strengthen civil society organizations' capacities across the continent of Africa to advocate for proper foundation and start for children. And this partnership we titled it Focusing on the Youngest Children. So we are excited that this is the first of the series of activities that we'll be doing together as the CSO Forum with the Africa Early Childhood Network. The second reason we are excited to be here today is that we have experts on the agenda today who are going to be sharing with us practical activities and skills that we need, particularly as civil society organizations, to implement learning through play as an essential feature of quality insofar as early childhood development provision for all children is concerned. So for us to have the panel of experts that are going to be speaking to us today, it's an exciting opportunity. We are also excited that today will provide an opportunity for us to understand more about good practice, the examples of good practice and improving parenting practices that we can also adapt as civil society organizations, as we work in communities and as we work with various schools to improve these. We are also excited that today we'll appreciate more in terms of how we can embed learning through play in advocacy as we seek to influence policy and practice, particularly influencing national policies, influencing plans, but also influencing programs at country level, as well as at regional level. So by saying that, I just want to welcome you to the webinar and ask that you listen actively, but also that you feel free to participate through the chat box, through the Q&A icon, as well as by raising hands as and when we are given that opportunity by the facilitators. Once again, I want to sincerely thank the Africa Early Childhood Network for this webinar. It comes at the right time, the time that COVID-19 has sort of thrown challenges at us, but also the right time as we conclude the year and we're going to have more time to connect with families and friends, but also to start thinking about 2021 and the type of interventions that we can employ in the coming year. And also thank the Africa Early Childhood Network for the subsequent webinars that we are going to have post this one. And I can only wish you as the lead organization together with the CSO Forum, but wish the participants as a whole wish you well in the deliberations that are going to take place today. You are all welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Felicitas, for the introduction and the very kind words. It is indeed a great pleasure for us to partner with the CSO Forum. We are looking forward to a vibrant relationship where we will achieve a lot for our children, particularly around child protection. And we are really glad that as a first step, we are launching this webinar series together. Thank you all once again for joining us. A great many thanks to Lego Foundation and UNICEF for partnering with us in hosting this series of webinars. For those who may not be very familiar with our work as the Africa Early Childhood Network, we were established to serve as a platform to champion excellence and collaboration in protecting children's rights, influencing policy and practice, strengthening partnerships, and sharing experiences and knowledge across the African continent. The network brings together civil society, academia, the private sector at national and regional levels. We are also very honored to be coordinating the Africa Union Early Childhood Development Cluster that seeks to achieve the early childhood objectives of the Continental Education Strategy. To find out more about our work, I'll kindly ask Dedan to put up links to our website so that you can find out more about who we are and what we do. So that is our website. For the purposes of communicating during this webinar series, please follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and you could tweet using the following hashtags. The next slide, Dedan. Either I Stand for Africa, COVID-19, Early Childhood Development Learning Through Play. We would really encourage you to tweet and get the word out there. We would really appreciate that. This webinar is in 3 languages, just to be sure that everybody is able to hear in the language that they find most comfortable. Please, on your screen at the bottom, you'll see the map of the world. You click on that and you choose the language you would prefer to follow this webinar in. We have French, Portuguese translation, French and Portuguese translation, as well as English. So this webinar series is really coming out of a documentation of good practices we have been doing over the past few months. And so throughout this series, that's going to be in 3 parts. This is the launch. On 2nd, we're going to have the first webinar. On 3rd, we're on 9th, we're going to have the 3rd webinar. And on 16th, we'll have the last one. Each one of these webinars will be highlighting some very good examples from our countries across the region. At the end of every webinar, we will have a small evaluation survey just to hear from you, to learn from you, so that we are always getting better. To get us started, it is my great pleasure to invite Jean. He is the UNICEF's Regional Child Protection Advisor for Eastern and Southern Africa region, which covers 21 countries. He has a wealth of experience working with international NGOs and the United Nations. He is specialized in international human rights and humanitarian law and has worked in various senior capacities in Rwanda, Angola, Democratic Republic of Congo, Chad, Sudan, and Kenya. He has also worked in the Child Protection Section Program Division in UNICEF New York and has previously served as a Senior Child Protection Advisor to the Africa Union Commission, seconded by UNICEF to the AU headquarters in Addis Ababa. We are really honored and privileged to have you here, sir. Please carry on and share with us your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Okengo. First of all, thank you to the Child Rights Network of Southern Africa and its coordinator, Felicitas Motimedi, for the opportunity to meet CSOs advocating for the rights and welfare of children across Africa. Child rights activists and African Union representative, all of you. Happy to meet you virtually today. And once again, thank you, Dr. Okengo, Executive Director, the Africa Early Childhood Network, for inviting me to this webinar series during the 17th CSOs Forum. Merci, obrigado. Thank you, CSOs representative, and all members of the CSOs Forum for your commitment to and vision for children. 2 years ago, we would probably have all met in person, either in lovely Nairobi, where I'm talking to you from, or in Addis Ababa. But COVID-19 has changed that, and much, much more. And this is why we are here together, virtually connected. COVID-19 represents a true children's crisis in every sense of term. The pandemic is placing at risk all of the systems upon which children rely. This pandemic is disrupting systems, health systems, immunization campaign, water, sanitation and hygiene system to prevent infection, economic safeguard for the families, counseling and mental health systems, access to learning. Basically, COVID-19 has disrupted play-based learning continuity, school feeding, nutrition support, safe hygiene practices, and responsive care for children of preschool age. In some countries, early childhood is the missing link of COVID response plans. And we all know leaving preschool behind is leaving education behind. Colleagues, this comes as an obvious cost to children's future. While saying so, we may remind ourselves that children between the ages of 3 and 6 might seem like they are only just beginning life's journey. But in fact, more than 85% of their brain development is already nearly in place. These early years provide a critical window of opportunity for girls and boys to build the foundations of learning and develop skills that can help them succeed in school and over the course of their lives. In our region, and due to the COVID pandemic, we have witnessed closure of ECD programs, which inadvertently created environments that limit opportunities for play. We have also seen rising cases of domestic violence and leading to numerous incidences of stress experienced by parents and other family members. I appreciate this webinar as an opportunity to deep dive on the cost of the pandemic for children that have negative effects on child development. Which colleagues bring me to the cost of inaction on early childhood education. By depriving tens of millions of children of access to pre-primary education, the COVID-19 pandemic and related school closures or delays in reopening are making a bad situation worse. In low-income countries, 8 out of 10 children are missing out on early childhood education opportunities. The most vulnerable children, those who would most benefit from early childhood education, are the least likely to be enrolled. These failures limit children's future by denying them opportunities to reach their full potential. They also limit their society's future, robbing our countries of the human capital that every society needs. Colleagues, the true spirit of this webinar is to challenge ourselves. All of us, we can ask ourselves. What if? What if we do not take appropriate action? I believe answer is clear. If unaddressed, negative effects of the pandemic on children may persist throughout their lives. As the problem is known by most of us, one of the UNICEF-supported solutions is also known by most of us. Recent findings on the benefits of pre-primary education underscore the importance of increased investment. Now the question is, in Eastern and Southern Africa, are we on the right track? As we discussed, our progress is admittedly uneven across countries. Luckily, we all recognize that these challenges must not detract from the importance of continuing our vital work. We can collectively do better. Investing in early childhood education and strengthening pre-primary education systems is needed to achieve progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, bearing in mind that the SDGs on Target 4.2 specifically convey a clear objective that all girls and boys have access to quality early childhood development, care, and pre-primary education so that they are ready for primary education. As part of this, expanding access to pre-primary education is a highly cost-effective investment decision for developing countries. And there are at least 3 vital reasons that support such an advocacy statement. 1, quality pre-primary education sets a strong foundation for learning. Two, universal pre-primary education helps make education system. 3, equitable pre-primary education is an effective strategy for promoting economic growth. Yet, we know that every US dollar spent on pre-primary education results in $9 of benefits to society. In other words, every dollar invested in quality pre-primary education and related services for disadvantaged children could bring an additional return of up to 10% every year throughout that child's lifetime. This is the reason why we are calling for high-level political commitment to making pre-primary education a priority and establishing policies for universal pre-primary education that prioritize the poorest and hardest to reach. To our member states in Africa, it is now more critical that ECE be prioritized by increasing domestic budgets and improving the efficiency with which ECE programs are delivered. To our traditional donors, a mere 0.7% of total international spending on education goes to pre-primary education. More than ever, international partners are key to supporting ECE and contributing to cost-effective investment in pre-primary education. We are calling upon development agencies to lead by example and allocate at least 10% of their education investment to pre-primary education, including in emergency contexts. The time for action is now. At UNICEF, we believe that as countries look to recover from this COVID-19 pandemic and pursue sustainable economic growth, they have an historic opportunity to close the gaps in educational quality once and for all, and reimagine how a generation of children grow, learn, and gain skills. Colleagues, before I conclude, and on a personal note, a few days ago, on November 19, I was so delighted to hear that my fellow countryman from Senegal, Sadio Mane, renowned Liverpool football player, has joined the international NGO Right to Play as its newest global ambassador, therefore lending his voice and support to protect, educate, and empower children around the globe through the power of play. Yes, every child has a right to play. Article 12 of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child calls upon state parties to recognize, respect, and promote the right of the child to engage in play. And we count on the continued leadership of the Child Rights Network of Southern Africa. We can make it our mission to act upon this big idea, our moonshot. Play can be a social equalizer, allowing children of diverse backgrounds to focus on what makes them similar rather than different. Play create a fun and comfortable environment to start learning acceptance. Sadio Mane is showing us, reminding us that we do not achieve these results alone. Through our partnerships with UN agencies, governments, civil society, and the private sector, we can indeed contribute to stories of hope and resilience in the face of COVID-19 pandemic, to quote the title of the blog series created by the Africa Early Childhood Network. This is our contribution for the young lives we are called upon to serve, save, and support. Their journeys are inseparable from ours. Let us walk with them, stand beside them, and always fight for their rights, including the right to play and provide children with a safe and happy childhood. For a better future, children's voice must be heard. Thank you, and I look forward to a productive webinar today. Back to you.
Thank you so much for your powerful statements and very clear communication about the need for us to prioritize and invest in early childhood. Thank you also for your call to action for each one of us. Indeed, each one of us has a role to play. Thank you once again. Our next speaker is Patricia Martin. Patricia holds a Master's of Law from the University of Cape Town and has been a child rights advocate for 20 years. She has extensive experience in early childhood system strengthening, policy development, and advocacy, as well as support to development partners across the region, including UNICEF, Save the Children, MIET Africa, SADC, the Africa Child Policy Forum, Orbis Africa, and the Center of Child Law and others. It's my privilege to welcome you, Patricia. Kindly proceed with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Lynette, for that introduction. I just want to share my screen. Please just let me know, everybody, if you can see the screen. Is it clear enough?
Yes, we can. It's clear.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to present a few slides very much around the legal framework governing the right to play, especially in the context of early child development. And of course, this any presentation around the rights of children cannot be discussed outside of the context of the Sustainable Development Imperative of right. So really, the title of my presentation sums it up. A right to play, as with other rights, especially the early childhood development rights, are not just a rights-based, but a sustainable development imperative. So the right to play is not a matter of child's play. And I think that is the overarching theme of what I want to share with you with regards to the content, the scope of the rights, but more importantly, the associated responsibilities of not just states parties, that is, the countries across Africa, governments across Africa, but the regional structures themselves. So as I mentioned, it clearly is a rights-based sustainable development essential. Play is a right in and of itself. It's recognized as a right, and expressly so in our treaty instruments, but it is also a critical gateway right. It's essential to the realization of a number of other rights, which are in turn key to the right to develop. And for this reason, it is one of the most fundamental building blocks of sustainable developments of the countries and of the continent. And it's realized through responsibilities that are to be filled by parents and caregivers as the primary duty bearers. And I'm going to speak to this in a lot more detail during the presentation. But critically then also responsibilities by governments who bear an overarching responsibility to create enabling environments for play. Play is an explicit African rights-based sustainable development imperative. It's recognized as a fundamental right by the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, and of course the Convention on the Rights of the Child. In terms of the African Charter, the right is recognized as the right to rest and leisure, to engage in play and recreational activities appropriate to the age of the child, and then to participate freely in cultural life and the arts. So it is packaged as a cluster of rights, which is a little bit challenging at times because it does tend to get lost, as we'll see a little bit later on. But not only is it recognized as a right at the highest regional level, it's recognized as key to child and national development in Africa's Agenda 2063 and Africa's Agenda for Children 2040. These two documents or instruments provide the continent's roadmap for achieving inclusive sustainable development, grounded in the development of our human capital on the continent. Notably, this is one of our biggest assets. By 2050, it is estimated that Africa will have 50 billion children who the future of, or the success and the sort of sustainability of our socioeconomic development and prosperity depends on unlocking the development potential of 50 billion children. The task is enormous. However, what the instruments do indicate is that unlocking this potential must be done, and it's an explicit requirement in the highest level of the development instruments, that it must be done through the realization of the rights in the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, which would include the right to play. So there's a clear and unequivocal responsibility for increased public investment in play. And the reason for this is that, in fact, when we look at the competing rights and interests around this rights-based sustainable development agenda, play is, in fact, one of the most important building blocks of human capital development and hence of sustainable development. And we all know the benefits of play. I think all of us on the webinar today are very, very familiar with it. But just to re-emphasize and to give it some legal grounding, the United Nations General Comment number 17 has been published, and it specifically deals with the right to play. And it stresses that play is a fundamental and vital dimension of the pleasure of childhood, but it is also an essential component of physical, social, cognitive, emotional, and spiritual development. And then, of course, we have the nurturing care framework for early childhood development, which translates the abundant accumulated evidence on the link between various factors, including play, on the development of children, and translates this into a policy framework, a roadmap for realizing optimal early development as the foundation of human capital. And play from birth is recognized as key to the optimal cognitive, social, and emotional development of children. The evidence is indisputable when it comes to this. So the nurturing care framework, as we all know, says that development requires nurturing care, and play is key to nurturing care. It's sort of a quotation from the nurturing care framework is that scientific findings from neuroscience and developmental psychology show that from the first months, quality time with a baby, including smiling, touching, talking, storytelling, listening to music, sharing and reading books, and engaging in play, builds the neural connections that strengthen the child's brain. So play is key to the cognitive development of every child, and all of those activities listed there are a form of play. And that is the key, it's the gateway to sustainable development of our countries in Africa and the continent as a whole. So the nurturing care framework unequivocally recognizes play as central to nurturing care and central to the development of the child as well as the continent and the countries within the continent. And it is explicitly an essential element of 2 of the 5 nurturing care domains, which would include responsive caregiving and opportunities for learning. So given the importance of play, who is then responsible for realizing this right to play that children have? Well, in the first instance, the primary duty bearer are your parents and your caregivers. And I think we just do need to pause for a moment and qualify that. They are not the sole responsible role players. They are the primary duty bearers, as in the first duty bearers. And here we can see the child at play in the center, with the parents and family being the first line of defense. That is the first environment in which children will receive their nurturing care, including play. However, this extends to caregivers across the caregiving continuum. So parents and families, your community play spaces and environments, your early childhood caregivers, your day mothers, moving on to your teachers in school. They all have a responsibility for the provision of nurturing care. But government has a prior duty to enable nurturing environments across this caregiving continuum to enable play. We all know that as we move closer towards the child at the center, teachers and schools, early childhood caregivers and day mothers, and even parents and families are unable or require support to provide the nurturing care that their children need. And critically, what we'll see, especially in the context of play, whether the enabling framework, the regulatory framework is very underdeveloped, treaty and development bodies at a regional and a global level have a very critical role to play by enabling and holding governments to account for enabling play-based nurturing environments. So what are government's responsibilities? Well, because play is a right and because it is important to the development of young children and therefore key to national and regional development, governments are duty-bound to take several implementation measures to respect, protect, promote, and ultimately ensure fulfillment of the right to play. They must report on it, and treaty bodies should then provide direction in the way of concluding observations and recommendations for strengthening implementation, as well as using an arsenal of other measures and mechanisms that it has for strengthening child development systems on the continent. And I'll speak to some of those in the recommendations. However, when we look at government and regional responses to its responsibilities, the right to play is probably one of the most misunderstood and neglected rights. Governments are failing to fulfill the obligations in relation to the right to play. But more importantly, treaty bodies like the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child are not holding governments to account for the right to play in the context of, given the importance of it. And all one has to do, is what I did, is review a number of the state party reports and then the concluding observations which were published in response to those at the African Union level. And what we see is that the reports, state party reports, are very thin on the measures that they've adopted to support play. And in terms of the reporting that they do, they focus very much on safe play and sports facilities for children of school-going age. In communities, play and cultural activities at school, and sport in terms of infrastructure. At both the state party and at the AU level, play is not addressed as a right across the life course, with responsibilities to support families as the most crucial play facilitator in the earliest years by strengthening the enabling care environment in the home and community programs and spaces. So we do need to unpack with a lot more detail, and we need to have a much clearer understanding amongst our sort of policy makers, decision makers, and our accountability structures on what government's responsibilities are. And in this regard, sorry, I'm just trying to get rid of this the screen here. There we go. There's 3 key documents which clarify government's responsibilities. There's the UN Committee's General Comments 7 and 17. 7 deals with the right to ECD, and Comment 17, as I've mentioned before, deals with the right to play. Then, of course, there is the Nurturing Care Framework, which is absolutely fundamental. It really provided an enormous boost to our understanding. In terms of the UN, the general comments require that governments ensure universal and equal enjoyment of the right to play, that they respect the right, and this means that they refrain from interfering directly or indirectly in the enjoyment of the right, that they protect the right by taking steps to prevent third parties from interfering with the right. And critically, this is where the implementation responsibilities really come to the fore. They have a responsibility to fulfill the right by taking all necessary legislative, administrative, judicial, budgetary, promotional, and other measures to make available all necessary services, provision, and opportunities that are necessary for full enjoyment of the right by all children. The Nurturing Care Framework explains further that governments have a duty to enable nurturing care through play by integrating this into the public ECD system that provides all parents and caregivers with the support that they need to provide play-based nurturing care from birth across the life course of the young child, and then provide targeted measures to overcome the risks and challenges to providing play-based nurturing care. And critically, these services must reach the most vulnerable. So in summary, what are government's responsibilities? Well, it's to create the enabling conditions for all families, parents, and caregivers to provide, pardon me, play-based nurturing care that promotes well-being and development through a public ECD system that secures sustained support and services for enabling play-based nurturing care for all caregivers and children from birth across the life course to maximize opportunities and address risk for the most vulnerable. And that system has to be articulated and operationalized through your systemic platforms, which would be policies and laws, adequate programs that cover the 5 domains and focus on play, adequate human resources for implementation, infrastructure to support implementation, financial resources to operationalize the programs and the planning for nurturing care for play, monitoring quality improvement and reporting, and ultimately strong leadership management and governance. Very quickly, a critical issue on the African continent, and the opening speaker spoke to some of these, is the government must respond to the risks which limit the ability of parents and caregivers to fulfill their children's right to play. And on the continent particularly, what are some of those key risks? Well, I've mentioned one of those already, and that is the very, very poor understanding and recognition of the importance and value of the right to play. Many adults, including parents, educators, and policymakers, see play as a frivolous or unproductive activity. It's not seen as something of fundamental developmental importance. And what we also see is that certain forms of play, such as competitive game sports, are valued more highly than other forms of play that are equally important for the child's development. And this is especially play in the earliest years, where there is a very widespread misunderstanding that there's a misunderstanding that play is about relationships and interactions between the child and caregiver. It's not about toys, equipment, and infrastructure. Having said that, the environment has to be safe, and there does come a time in the child's development and stage of development where toys, infrastructure, and supportive materials are valuable that contribute to the evolving capacity for play. However, environmental hazards are becoming increasingly problematic, such as polluted water, overcrowded cities, lack of local safe play areas, and such like. This is then compounded in especially high-level urban communities where you have high levels of crime and violence, community unrest, and child trafficking. And then, as I mentioned, increasing levels of urbanization means that there's no longer such free access to natural environments. Perhaps one of the biggest threats to play is the pressure for educational achievement. There's growing pressure on educators and children to improve the quality of teaching and learning that takes place in early learning centers and schools. And this has seen a shift in emphasis on formal learning at the expense of play-based learning in the classroom and not on the playground. And this in turn has resulted in overly structured and programmed schedules. Parents, caregivers, early childhood development practitioners, and care institutions increasingly regulate children's activities and programs, resulting in overstructured programs. So those are the risks that need to be addressed. The response from governments has to be tailored to meet the additional risks of especially vulnerable groups, and these are just a number of them that are particularly vulnerable in the context of play. Children in poverty, in rural areas, overcrowded urban areas, crime-ridden communities, children in humanitarian crises, children with disabilities, and children living in institutions. So what should the system, the nurturing care system for ECD look like? Well, we need to see national policies and laws, national integrated as well as sectoral policies and laws, that mandate and obligate statewide realization and protection of the right to play as an early and national development imperative. We then need to have comprehensive integrated programs that provide age-appropriate combinations of your supportive services to enable all and address risks to play-based nurturing care, especially for vulnerable groups. And that's especially in the early years that's been neglected. We need adequate resources, financial and human, and infrastructure to support not just provisioning, but planning, population and targeted planning for scalable, sustainable programs. We need data collection, monitoring, analysis, and reporting that leads to improvement in play-based planning and measurement of impact. And this is where we start talking about what do we actually measure? What are our indicators? And this is very, very thin on the ground when it comes to this particular right. And critically, it is a government-wide responsibility which requires national leadership and coordination to secure statewide prioritization of play-based development. So who is responsible and what should be done? So really, I'm moving on to some of our recommendations here, looking at what we've seen. Given the thin understanding, given the lack of depth of understanding and the lack of depth of the policy responses to the gravitas of the right to play, we really need to look to regional guidance and direction. And in this regard, the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child has an enormous role to play. As in the case of the committee, the UN committee, we should have an African general comment on the right to play. Another opportunity is for the African Committee to appoint a special rapporteur on ECD and play-based development, given the amount of guidance, direction, and research that is needed, and the translation of that into policy directives. And we need to see very clear reporting guidelines on play, which starts providing some kind of level of measure. What are the indicators? What are the targets that we are working towards? These should then inform national policies and laws which would domesticate the right to play. And given what we've said, this would require a government-wide and sector-wide range of policies, including a national ECD policy that integrates play as a central driver. But more than that, to have national childcare and protection policies that place play at the center of protection and development. Of course, we need play-based early education policies and curriculum statements, standards for play-based developmentally supportive care environments, laws obligating and regulating play in alternative care settings, family support policies that place play at the center of the development of children, human settlement policies and strategies that recognize and advance playful environments, environmental health policies that secure safe environments for healthy play, and then critically local government plans and policies that enable play in communities and caregiving settings. And that is something that we need to pay a lot more attention to, because that is actually where a lot of the regulatory framework exists for play at a family and a local and a community level. What we then also need are programs, and this is really where we need to look in a lot more detail. I think where this webinar really will contribute. We need programs that will enable all and overcome risks and challenges across the life course, provide age-appropriate support starting from birth. This would include parenting support programs that include education and material support for promoting play from birth. Formal structured ECD programs of support on the importance of play and how to support it for day mothers and your ECD play groups, as well as your structured ECD centers. We need programs that target vulnerable groups with appropriate targeting, delivery, and defined support and service modalities. So what do programs supporting the right to play for children with disabilities look like? These need to be defined very clearly in alignment with our governing regulatory human rights framework. There needs to be the development of human resources, as I said, not just for provisioning, but for planning, monitoring, and quality improvement of the right to play in health, social development, and education sector, human settlements and environment, as well as local government and others. We need appropriate infrastructure and equipment to ensure safety and minimum provisioning standards, as well as safe play stations, spaces. And of course, the big one is we need increased financial investments to support the system. Otherwise, we have a huge disjuncture between policy and practice. And of course, we need to monitor and improve the quality through quality improvement frameworks. So I've rushed through those last few slides because I know I have been running out of time, but thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patricia, for highlighting the importance of play and the central role that play has in the development of children. Indeed, when we provide opportunities for children to play, we are not doing them a favor. We are protecting their rights. Play is of fundamental importance, which is provided for in the CRC and the African Charter. And this, as you have correctly said, requires policy response and prioritization by governments. Thank you for the solid recommendations, including the development of a general comment on play. Every year, countries are required to submit reports, actually regularly, not every year. Countries are required to submit reports on the progress they are making towards the achievement of the Africa Charter on the rights and welfare of children. During the next presentation, we're going to hear what countries are actually reporting. Are they reporting about the progress they're making with regards to the development of our young children, It is now my pleasure to introduce Andiwo Obondo, who will share more about the country reports. Andiwo has over 20 years of consistent experience in child agency, program leadership, grant management, advocacy for policy influence, and monitoring, evaluation, and learning across the national, regional, and international organizations in Africa. He has worked with various organizations, including FAWE, UNESCO, GIZ, and has provided technical advice for education accountability, focusing on advocacy or education reforms. Thank you very much for joining us, Andiwo. Over to you.
I think before I go straight to the country reports, allow me to share briefly why we think right to play is important, and also why the concept of right to play is not a fresh concept. It's rooted in African cultures, as I'll be able to show in a while. In fact, I want to start by saying, quoting UNICEF, how they describe play as one of the most important ways in which young children gain essential knowledge and skills. And they see play, consider play as very critical in the brain development process from as early as pregnancy. I think I forgot to apologize that I may not be able to show my screen because I've had serious internet problems and I'm connected to the meeting on phone. Understanding the right to play. Play is active engagement on the part of children in voluntary, pleasurable, and learning activities. And learning through play helps children make sense of the world around them as they engage in play. Learning through play involves child interaction with the environment through speaking to oneself and also to others. Why is play important? Through play, children learn in ways most natural and engaging to them. Children have natural ability to learn about the world around them through play. And vital life and work for skills, e.g. communication, creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and problem solving expertise can be acquired through play. Global learning crisis that we've been talking about over the last 10 years has much to do with how children learn and not what is taught. And we believe that if they can be able to induce playful learning activities, children at younger ages would learn better than they are doing now. Playful experiences offer a unique context for supportive and rich learning experiences in early childhood. And play forms the foundation of intellectual, social, physical, and emotional skills necessary for the success in school and later in life for our children. I think this is, the importance of play has been supported by the 2014 declaration of the International Play Association, which says play is important in the lives of children in that it gives them pleasure, is essential to their healthy physical and mental growth, and enhances their ability to function in the culture and society in which they are born. If you look at again the African Charter on the Right and Welfare of Children, Article 12 of the same charter recognizes the critical role of play in the growth and development of the child and appreciates that play may differ depending on the sociocultural and economic environment of the child. And we have, I think AU has formed a committee, the African Committee of Experts on the Right and Welfare of Children, which is trying to monitor compliance. And I think the report about from the member states will be looking at how they are complying with the requirements of this committee. And then we also have UNHCR, which Patricia has also talked about, the United Nations Convention on the Right of the Child, which compels state parties to recognize the rights of the child to rest and leisure, to engage in play and recreational activities that are age appropriate, and also to participate freely in cultural life and beyond. The UN has a committee as well on CRC, and in one of its general comments, affirms that enough play, children both enjoy and challenge their current capacities, whether they are playing alone or with others. We also have the general comment 7, I think my previous colleague has talked about, where the committee notes that insufficient attention has been given by state parties and others to the implementation of the provisions of Article 31 of the Convention. And I think this is very relevant to us because we also want to look at how African countries, the member states, have performed in terms of complying with the requirements of the Charter, the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Children. That AU's Agenda to 263 and also the Continental Education Strategy for Africa 2016-2025 places emphasis on improved skills development and based only with focus on TVET and STEM. Well, I think we want to note here for the CSO Forum that there's room for AU to support member states to adjust their education policies and systems towards a greater focus on 21st century skills and to redefine how our children learn and to empower them for the future. We must stop overlooking a powerful part of the solution, learning through play. And I think that is something that we need to take up and see how we can be able to engage AU to be able to focus the member states around it. And I want to also underscore the fact that right to play or the importance of play has been underscored in African cultures and it's not a foreign concept. Literature exists on African proverbs that directly emphasize the right to play and learning through play. And I will give a few examples. From West Africa, we have picked a proverb that speaks to how important communities encourage children to play. Nobody shows heaven to a child because the child sees it, him or herself. Then from Central Africa, another example, a child becomes an adult by himself, not by others, which means through play, they're able to learn, to fit and grow. It is during growing that a cock breaks its wings. That is the Southern Africa proverb that tells you within the African culture and context, play has been regarded as very important. When lions have gone, hyenas dance. That is an example from East Africa. So I think this tells you that at least this is a foreign concept and it's rooted in the African culture. Compliance with the Charter. Out of 55 AU member states, 12 have never filed either initial or periodic reports. And I think the full report, I don't need to go through the list because of time, but the full report indicates who are these 12. They have never filed a report, either initial or periodic. 30 of the members are yet to file any periodic reports as a follow-up to the initial reports. That means they filed their first reports and then they have never followed up with any periodic reports. And I have also a list of who the 30 are. And then only 9 are fully compliant, having filed both initial and periodic reports. Some of them have done one periodic report after the initial, others have done 2, others have done 3. And you realize that some of them are combining, like some are reporting, making 2 or 3 reports, one or 2 reports into one, as one to the committee. And I think the list, the number of 9, the list of 9 is available in the report. And then 6 countries have not ratified the charter. I think that is also important for the CSO Forum. How can you be able to work with the committee to persuade the 6 who have not ratified the charter? And I've also provided a list to that effect. Issues and gaps in reporting. One is inconsistency in reporting. You realize that, I'll give an example of Kenya, where the initial report was very comprehensive, very detailed, and raised a number of issues with recommendations. But the subsequent reports, which combined periodic report 1 to 3, was a bit far much short of what was expected. Did not actually mention much about the right to play, didn't talk about much of the challenges, and did not also talk about the recommendations that were well laid in the initial report. So I think inconsistency in terms of reporting is an issue that we need to pick up. That means that we are not able to follow through what countries report in one report compared to the other if they are not able to follow through what they say in one report. A good number of countries don't give serious attention to right to play or learning through play in their initial project reports. And I think if you have chance to go through this report maybe after the webinar, you will be able to note which countries, some of the countries we mentioned, we are giving examples. The reports which offer any coverage to right to play often highlight school-based activities, normally undertaken for leisure and recreation, such as physical education, sports, drama, music, clubs, school educational tours or trips, exit programs and school and science visits, and don't talk much about out-of-school activities or some of the play activities that happen outside the formal environment. Issues and gaps again, interventions and activities are not costed, and most reports don't talk about financing and budget allocation. So it is very difficult to follow through and even put pressure on governments to be able to increase resources for play if they are not costing activities, the interventions that they propose, either policy interventions, legislative interventions, or administrative measures. Regarding challenges and constraints, without any mitigation measures. If you look at maybe some of the initial reports compared to periodic reports, keep on repeating the same challenges and content, but they don't indicate mitigation measures or provide any progress report in terms of how they have addressed some of the concerns identified in previous reports. The importance of play is not widely recognized, reading through the reports, because the focus largely is on health and education, and largely formal education. Many countries tend to focus on formal learning activities and on teachers that deliver more academic results. And finally, a few recommendations that can be useful. One, the first set is for AU member states, where we are proposing that they should be able to support research to enhance play-based learning and ensure data on play-based learning is available. They need to develop skillful and play-based curriculum for children. They need to make play affordable and play facilities accessible to children and promote making of play items from locally available materials using appropriate technologies. They need to enforce the local laws and policies which provide for children play areas or playgrounds, provide guidelines, and increase support to play. They need to increase funding and budget allocation for children and play activities. And I think, as I said in the previous comment, this will not be very easy unless we cost the activities, we cost the interventions, so that we can be able to begin to negotiate or lobby different departments of government, like ministries of finance, to increase resources for play and play activities. Recommendations for CSOs. CSOs should advocate for every child's right to play, for accessible, high quality early learning, and easy opportunity, and for vibrant, safe, and child-friendly public play spaces. Collaborating with others to pioneer ways of improving access to quality play for all, and leading and supporting campaigns for all children to have freedom and space to play throughout childhood. And then empowering families, communities, and educators to consider, promote, and plan for play. And then lastly, recommendations for families and communities. Families and community members should allow children to direct their own play, but provide access to better play environment and required play materials. Families and community members ought to understand the impact of play and directing play into meaningful learning. And finally, the presence of caregivers, community assistants, or local teachers in the community is one major step that a community can undertake in the promotion of learning through play. I think those are some of the recommendations. The first set was for AU member states, the second set was for the CSOs, and the last set is for families and communities. Thank you very much for listening. Unfortunately, I may not be able to show you the slides, but I hope you will be able to find time after the webinar to read it through the editorial report, which I'll be able to send to the network, the secretariat.
Thank you so much, Andiwo. I really wish we had more time, because your report is very rich and we shall share it with all the participants. Indeed, you have raised some very, very key issues. First, that play is not a foreign concept, so we should not lose the ways that we used to play with our children, the positive practices that we had. It is clear that in the reporting we have issues with inconsistency, compliance, and very importantly, there's a huge gap in comprehensive reporting on all aspects of play. We shall disseminate the recommendations you have made for the different stakeholders. Just because we have a tight kind of time frame, we can't go further. I would like to encourage all participants, if you have a question, kindly put it down in the chat box. We may not have enough time to respond to all of them, but we shall definitely share them with our presenters. And if we have your email address, you can get your responses. Ever since early childhood was included in the SDGs, the biggest question has been, how do we track progress towards the achievement, particularly of SDG 4.2? I'm very happy to share with you that just a couple of days ago, the Early Childhood Development Index was launched. It captures the achievement of key developmental milestones by children between the ages of 24 months and 56 months. To make it a little bit more interesting, are going to share a video that just highlights what is contained in this ECDI.
A child's first steps, first words, the first attempt to mimic a caregiver's gestures, to draw a picture or to write a word. These are important milestones on a child's journey to realizing his or her full potential and magical moments for anyone watching. But to achieve these, children need an enabling and supportive environment in which to grow, learn, and thrive. Early moments matter. The best possible combination of nutrition, protection, and stimulation is critical for optimal brain development. It also creates the conditions for health, happiness, and progress throughout childhood and beyond. Solid early development stays with children as they advance into adulthood. It prepares them to help their families, their communities, and their countries. Confronted with compelling evidence and sustained advocacy, the world has come to recognize that investing in early childhood development is an essential component of national and global prosperity. In 2015, early childhood development was included in the Sustainable Development Goals in recognition of its importance in eradicating poverty and hunger, promoting healthy lives, reducing inequality, fostering economic growth, and building peaceful societies. These global goals include a commitment to ensure that by the year 2030, all children have equitable access to quality early childhood development and early learning opportunities. A specific indicator was chosen to monitor the impact of government's action towards this target, and UNICEF was tasked to lead the development of a measure to track progress. This new measure is now available. The ECDI 2030 captures the achievement of key developmental milestones by children between the ages of 24 and 59 months. Mothers or primary caregivers are asked 20 questions about the way their children behave in some everyday situations and the skills and knowledge they have acquired. The ECDI 2030 is the product of a rigorous process that began in 2015. It started with a thorough review of existing instruments that measure developmental outcomes in children under 5. This led to the identification of a first draft of questions. Dedicated data collection efforts were then carried out to understand how mothers interpreted the questions and to ensure that they were relevant across contexts and cultures. These preliminary data facilitated an assessment of the validity and reliability of the new instrument across children of different ages and socioeconomic backgrounds. Performance standards were then established so that children could be classified as developmentally on track according to the new measure. This whole process involved extensive consultations with experts. The work was overseen by the Interagency and Expert Group on ECD Measurement, which included partner agencies and national statistical authorities. It was advised by a technical advisory group composed of distinguished researchers, as well as practitioners with expertise in assessing children's development around the world. The ECDI 2030 can be integrated into existing national data collection efforts. It's accompanied by standard guidance and a framework for technical assistance to support implementation. It addresses the need for nationally representative and internationally comparable data on ECD, collected in a standardized way. And because the data can be disaggregated by key demographics and subnational areas, the use of this measure can also help advance the SDG commitment to leave no one behind. As a consequence, the ECDI 2030 will do more than provide the data necessary for reporting on SDG 4. It is a powerful tool for understanding and taking stock of how children are faring. Armed with this knowledge, governments will be able to identify opportunities where investments are needed to do the best for children from the very beginning and to enjoy the benefits far into the future.
Oftentimes when we need early childhood data, because of its multi-sectoral nature, we often have to go all over the place. I'm very happy to share with you that we now have profiles that provide early childhood data for every single country in our region at a glance. Leading this process is Professor Linda Richter, and it is now my pleasure and honor to introduce Professor Linda Richter. Linda Richter is a distinguished professor at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa. She's also the chair of the Nurturing Care for Early Childhood Development Matrix Joint Technical Working Group of the Countdown to 2030. She has led the 2017 series, Advancing Early Childhood Development from Science to Scale, as well as the first round of ECD profiles in 2018. Linda conducts social and public health research into the effects of adversity on children and families, particularly with regard to early childhood development, families, and the role of men and fathers in child development. I'm also very happy to say that Linda is on the board of the Africa Early Childhood Network, and we have benefited immensely from her wisdom and her guidance. Over to you, Professor, to share with us on the Countdown 2030.
Thank you very much, Lynette. It's an absolute honor to be here and to have shared so many years with you and AFCAN and others on trying to advance early childhood development in our region. Am I clear? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Thank you very much. What I'm going to speak about is a little bit about the background of the country profiles and then speak about some results from the 2020 country profiles, particularly related to our region in sub-Saharan Africa. The country profiles, as Lynette said, emerged out of the Nurturing Care for Early Child Development and the Lancet series, Advancing Early Child Development, Science to Scale. Once we realized that momentum was gathering, that there would be expansion of early child development, we realized there was a huge need to track progress and monitor accountability. Over the 3 years since we started the first country profiles, we have now become part of Countdown to 2030 for Women, Children and Adolescents Health. And this was, as you will recall, the first Countdown was formed in 2003 to monitor SDGs 4 and 5, maternal and child survival. And it has evolved to a much bigger picture of health for women, children, and adolescents. Now, since 2019, the profiles are maintained and updated by UNICEF, supported by a technical committee. Now, nurturing care is the framework for the country profile. For those of you who've looked at country profiles in other parts on other issues, you will see that they're often just tables of figures. We have organized the data that we report according to the nurturing care framework, particularly the 5 components, that's good health, adequate nutrition, security and safety, early learning, and responsive caregiving. We also collect data on, or put together data on the facilitating environments for nurturing care. That's what caregivers, characteristics of caregivers, communities, services, and policies. And of course, nurturing care is at the heart of global goals. And so we are trying to relate these indicators to the SDGs and to survive, thrive, and transform. Now, this is what the country profiles look like. They're organized in this particular way. So right at a glance at the very top, you see some demographic information about a country. I just chose Zambia. My page opened at that point. We then look at threats to early child development, such as maternal mortality, violent discipline, and so on. In the middle, you'll see the round circles of the 5 components of nurturing care, indicators for each of those. The facilitating environment, which consists of policies and conventions. And then in that middle section with those bar graphs going sideways are some analyses which indicate to us some evaluation of what's happening. So the first one looks at trends in children at risk of poor development. The second one looks at gender and residence differences. The third one looks at costs of the lifetime costs of early growth deficits. And then we have two new indicators, which I'll talk about in more detail. One on children with functional difficulties or disabilities, and children developmentally on track. The data comes for these profiles comes from, first of all, the multiple indicator cluster surveys, or MIX, and the USAID Demographic and Health Services, DHS, as well as selected representative household surveys in countries. We also include, where the data is missing, country data published in high impact journals. Now, with those country profiles, we also publish a technical appendix, which indicates what the day, how the data is defined, where the indicators come from, the dates that they cover, which countries that they are present in. And we roughly have data from 2005 to 2020, although we have earlier data than that. We tend to analyze data from 2005. Now you can see the progress we've made since 2018. In dark green are what we started with. We started with 91 low and middle income countries that we were producing country profiles on. By 2019, we'd expanded to 138 low and middle income countries. And this year we've hit something of a milestone in terms of the philosophy and goals of the SDGs. That is, we include 63 high income countries. The data from those high income countries is spotty, and I can tell you why that is so, but we are nearing a global picture of ECD, and so we feel tremendous progress has been made. We launched these 2020, now have translations into 4 additional languages. The 2 additional indicators that are put in are children developmentally on track. Now, just to recall that this is what is called the old ECDI. So data collected with the ECDI between 2010 and 2019. And this applies to children 3 to 6 years of age who are developmentally on track in at least 3 of the ECDI domains. ECDI is being replaced by the ECDI 2030, but of course there won't be this continuity of data. It will only be in new mixed data sets that the new ECDI will be collected in countries. Then the second indicator that has been added is children with functional difficulties or disability. And this covers children 2 to 4 years with a functional difficulty in at least 1 domain on the child functioning module. And we have data from 21 countries between 2017 and 2019. We also revised some indicators. For those of you who recall how we represented the paid maternity and paid paternity leave in 2018 and 2019, you will have noticed that it was somewhat confusing because some countries were noted to have paid paternity leave but no paid maternity leave. This was really because the indicator was differently designed. So maternity leave, we have a very clear convention, Convention 183 from the International Labour Organization, which says that maternity leave is 100% of wages paid for 14 weeks. On the other hand, any paternity leave is credited to countries. We changed that then to actually put maternity and paternity leave on the same scale, so less than 14 weeks paid, 14 to 18, and then the aspirational targets going beyond 18 up to more than 26 weeks. This, I think, has made this indicator much easier to understand. We have now translations into Arabic, French, Russian, and Spanish, and as demand grows, I'm sure we will respond with additional translations of the country profiles for the countries speaking that particular language. The one thing about having standardized indicators from representative surveys that are conducted and interpreted in exactly the same way in many countries is that you can track trend data. So these 3 graphs look at the trends in children at risk from 2005 through to 2010 to 2015. In dark red are countries where more than 2/3 of children are at risk of poor development. The orange countries are those countries where between 1/3 and 2/3 of children are at risk, and the pink countries are those with fewer than 1/3 of children at risk. Now you will see there's quite a significant contraction from 2005, 2010 to 2015 of countries in which more than 2/3 of children at risk. And this was largely because of the gains made in reducing poverty. We are going to see reversals of this with COVID in the future. And so this kind of trend data is very important to tracking what is happening in our countries. Our key findings are, and this applies to all the countries we've analyzed, is that on average, rural children fare far worse than urban children. I know many people are concerned with urban slums, but it's very difficult from nationally representative data to extract urban data about children in urban slums. But in general, rural children fare worse. Children from poorer households fare worse, as we would expect. The important finding is that in the under 5 age group, there are negligible differences between young girls and boys on all of the indicators we examine. Now you will see from the data I showed on those trends that we really need to focus on sub-Saharan Africa to prevent the early loss of critically important human capital. Patricia pointed out that we are rich in human resources in the sense of where the one part of the world where populations are growing. And so we cannot afford to lose this critically important human capital. So let me show you that children in sub-Saharan Africa are disadvantaged on all the 4 indicators that we are tracking. Children exposed to extreme stunting or poverty. Amongst low and middle income countries between those dates of 2010 and 2018, the situation was that 55% were exposed in sub-Saharan Africa, only 37% in the other low and middle income countries. 76% of children in our region are not attending early child development and care programs. 53% of children are not receiving adequate home stimulation, and 39% of children in our region are not developmentally on track. And this is higher than the average for other low and middle income countries. If we look at the most recent data, we can see that actually the situation for children has declined. So we have children exposed to stunting or extreme poverty remains the same because we use the same data for both the earlier period and the later period. But if we look at the more recent surveys, we now have 80% of children not attending an ECE program outside of their home in the sub-Saharan African region, 58% of children not receiving adequate stimulation, and 40% of children not developmentally on track. And I think the urgency of this is that with the declining socioeconomic problems due to COVID and the various procedures that have been adopted by government to contain the pandemic, together with mental distress and other difficulties people are exposed to, we're going to see declines in all of these indicators if we don't urgently pick up these issues. We also have to realize that children in sub-Saharan Africa face higher levels of threats to their development from the very beginning compared to either the global average, the average of high-income countries, the average of low and middle-income countries, and we can look at the ranges. So if we look at low birth weight, our region has the highest percentage of low birth weights, with a range of right up to 24%. Preterm births the same. We have the highest rate of preterm births going up to 18%. The number of women having babies at 18 or younger is 27% in our region compared to other regions, and going up to 51%. Under 5 stunting is 31% on average in our region, going up to 54%. Children with inadequate supervision in their homes being cared for by other children, by other children is 32%, going up to 61%. And harsh punishment is high all over the world, but highest in our region of up to 94%. And this is in the 46 sub-Saharan African countries, excluding the 2 high-income countries, Seychelles and Mauritius. Now, while this data is very, very useful, there are huge gaps in the data. And I just want to point to 4 areas in which there are big gaps. We have no indicators on responsive caregiving, which includes play. There are many countries where we only have a few indicators. We have very little trend data, that is data over time, in which we can track progress or deterioration. And there are very important areas that we're still to even begin to gather such data. So if you look at responsive caregiving, when we developed these profiles, we made suggestions that some tracking indices could be: do countries provide public information about early childhood? Do countries provide some kind of screening and support for parental mental health? Do countries provide support for parents, like groups and home visits? And is there quality childcare provision for the We are not yet making a lot of progress on that, although the pressure to develop indicators on quality childcare are growing, the pressure to develop indicators on parental mental health are growing, as well as on services for parents. But where we are making progress, and we should always be mindful that progress is always slow and we have to keep on the path and keep determined. So in 2020, WHO published the guideline on early childhood development, on responsive caregiving and early learning in particular. Now, this covers what has been covered today, that is play. This is a hugely important guideline because what it is a summary of all the available evidence showing that both responsive caregiving and early learning are important for development and therefore are covered in a recommendation that countries should include activities to stimulate responsive caregiving and support responsive caregiving and early learning through health services and other related provisions. And Frances Bud, who's I saw that she was one of the participants, that was one of the people very much involved in this guideline. There are also a number of current activities convened through the WHO, UNICEF, World Bank, Nurturing Care Framework working groups, which are actively pursuing, and again, Frances is involved in this, pursuing indicators for responsive caregiving. So we are beginning to make progress and to close these gaps. Of course, it's never fast enough for all of us, but we are doing it. If you look at the gaps in data, what we have in red is sub-Saharan Africa, in gray, all low and middle income countries, in yellow, high income countries, and green, all countries. Now, here is one place where sub-Saharan Africa is rich in data. We have, on average, more countries with data on these essential indicators of children's development: threats to children, risks, early learning, health, nutrition, security, safety, the conventions, and the policy. So here is an asset that we have in comparison to many other countries and regions, and we need to use it. And I think that would be my take-home message from our analysis of sub-Saharan African countries. Now we need definitions, indicators, data collection instruments for some very important aspects of young children's development. Children in residential institutions. There was recently 2 papers in Lancet, Child and Adolescent Health and in Global Health on the difficulties of even counting children in residential institutions because of the difficulty of defining what a residential. We need to agree and reach consensus on indicators for parental mental health and how they could be collected in a standardized way through representative country surveys. Similarly, we need these indicators on affordable quality daycare. And because of climate change and other climatic conditions, we need indicators on indoor and outdoor air pollution. Of course, there's many more, but we need work on this, and this requires global collaboration to agree on these consensus definitions, indicators, data collection methods. But we are moving from data to action, and the ECD country profiles present in one place the latest information to assess country progress in improving the health, development, and future prospects of young children. I think as such, they are a great resource to us in our region. The country profiles, the data sets, the sources, and the methods of data collection can be accessed at on the UNICEF webpage, the Countdown to 2030 page, the EGDAN webpage, and on the Nurturing Care webpage. So thank you very much, and ask if you could terminate my screen share.
Thank you so much, Prof. There's always so much to learn from you. You have highlighted the situation of children in our region, and we can see clearly from the data that we are not doing well. And you have also shared the country profiles, and I encourage everybody to follow the links that were shared. We will share all the presentations so that you can learn more and you can use these ECD profiles as advocacy tools in your own countries. We're now shifting gears a bit. I'm going to beg your indulgence. We are running a little bit late. If you will allow us just a few more minutes so that we can have our panel session. To moderate this session is Ms. Janet Mudoni Ouko, African Program Manager responsible for advocacy. On our panel, we have two distinguished panelists, Henry Kabwe. He is the Executive Director of the Media Network on Child's Rights and Development. He has worked with Monitor and National Mirror newspapers in Lusaka. He has also worked as a correspondent for Voice of America and is the former chairperson of the Zambian chapter of the Media Institute of Southern Africa. The other presenter is Craig Farla. Craig is the Director of Children in Crossfire. Craig has extensive leadership experience within civil society organizations, working in international development in Tanzania, Zambia, and in the wider region. His programming experience spans various aspects of health and education, and more recently, early childhood development, where he has had successes influencing policy change and implementation. He currently works with Children in Crossfire in Tanzania. We will be hearing more voices from the countries in our coming webinars. Here, we were highlighting just two voices to give you a taste of what will be coming in the next webinars. Over to you, Janet.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lynette. And indeed, as the network we are not able to conclude this kind of a webinar without listening to what is happening in individual countries. Today, we are going to listen to two experiences from Zambia and from Tanzania. And I want to request Mr. Henry and Craig, if you can please put on your video so that for 3 minutes you interact with us and you share with us your experience. And I want to begin with Craig. If you can, please share with us an experience. We know there's a lot quite that has happened in terms of your engagement with civil society, not only in Tanzania, in Zambia. You have a very rich profile. What's your experience engaging at country level, supporting partners, supporting governments to implement really the right to play? Over to you, Craig, in 3 minutes.
Thank you, Janet, and good morning, good afternoon to all colleagues, and to recognize all of your efforts in championing the right to play for our children. In a sort of a quick summary bite of our experience as Children in Crossfire in Tanzania over the past 5 years in supporting learning through play, particularly for children in the pre-primary education class in our public school system. I would first consider our context as being a time of almost a positive emergency, one of a real opportunity, but also one of a real challenge in being able to realize the right to play for the majority of our children. Pre-primary education is now a formal part of our basic education system. It's also part of the fee-free education in Tanzania. And in this context, over the last 4 years, we have had a surge in enrollment of children who are accessing pre-primary. Overnight, we nearly had 500,000 children, additional children, who our net enrollment ratio surged from one third to almost a half of all children aged 5 within pre-primary education. Now, as much as this was extremely exciting, it obviously really placed a huge pressure on the system to be able to provide quality pre-primary education and really make it fit for purpose. We have a situation where there's typically an average of more than 100 children to every pre-primary class, and up to more than 200 children for every qualified teacher within pre-primary education. Now, to boil this down to some of the experience in right to play and learning through play, we do have a curriculum in Tanzania which really prioritizes learning through play. It's competency-based, and it is based around teacher and child-led activities, and is looking at spaces for play, guided play, free play for children in order to be able to develop their competencies. Now, obviously the big question is, how do you do this, particularly in a context where we have up to more than 100 children to a class or 200 children to every qualified teacher? And really our programming experience over the last few years has been to support pre-primary teachers in how to cope within that context, within an under-resourced and overcrowded context, but to really deliver the exciting learning through play fundamentals of our curriculum. That's largely been done through two main approaches. It's in-service training for our pre-primary teachers, really to be able to manage large classes and be able to try and realize learning through play practices, and also to be able to support quality assurance, mentorship and coaching mechanisms for the pre-primary teachers, both community of learners amongst their own colleagues and also in different levels of education, administration, quality assurance and support. This may include breaking down the classes into shifts, 2 shifts in a day, halving the children who are within the class, so bringing in volunteers, parents, assistants to be able to support some of the supervision of the children, or splitting them into having half of the class in the classroom for a teacher-led session, and meanwhile, parallel to that, half of the class outside in free play, being able to be in the playground, having the right to play. Likewise, it's about supporting teachers how to put in a stimulating learning environment, organize a classroom so that children can actually play, can actually make use of learning corners, which are part of our pre-primary curriculum. But how do you actually realize learning corners if you've got 200 children in a class? And how do you resource those learning corners, particularly when they're looking at bringing in pre-numeracy, pre-reading, pre-writing, games into the classroom? And this has been a real eye-opener, I think, for the school system and for the communities, that yes, we can use the most basic resources which are in our communities, in our schools, whether they're maize cobs, whether they're bottle tops, whether they're plastic bottles, whether they're blocks of wood, etc. So long as they're safe and they're hygienic, then children will know how to use those various different materials for play and for being able to socialize together and just generally enjoy the pre-primary experience. I think the final part which I'd like to go to in this summary is we found it critical to be as aligned as we can to the system, obviously, whether it's in policy, whether it's in curriculum, whether it's in the structures and how we work with the region, with the councils, with the wards, with the communities, with the schools, and how we work with the most basic resources which are there within the schools for delivering effective pre-primary programs. And this has really been done through the ministries and the departments and agencies who are tasked for pre-primary education. They've embraced learning through play. And I think this is a really important message to everyone, that as much as we see sometimes that there seems to be sort of negative attitudes or the right to play is typically relegated to be one of the final sort of priorities for children. In fact, when decision makers are really engaged with the importance for the right to play, when they see how it can be done with the most basic resources, and within the policy and the structures and the human and financial resources which are available in the system, they really embrace it, and they really believe that it's a right which can be fulfilled for children. So at this stage, we are currently working with the government in demonstrating how to take this to scale. We're in Dodoma region. We're currently working in all 200 schools or 2 councils in Dodoma region in being able to show the opportunity for pre-primary education and looking at how to take this to scale across all 700 schools of Dodoma region within the system, so that we can have a scalable model for taking this, for informing a national model and taking this to scale so that all of our children realize their right to play within pre-primary. Asante.
Thank you so much, Craig. Irresistible experience sharing there. Nobody is able to stop you. And very exciting listening to how we can deliver learning through play under very limited resources. Indeed, that is commendable. And we want to say that we really apologize. We have very little time, but we will be taking a lot more of those experiences in our coming 3 other webinars. We have webinars on 2nd, 9th, and 16th. Please do not miss. And now I want to bring on board Henry. Henry, you are a decorated journalist. You've worked a lot in media in Zambia, and we would want to hear, what is the role of media really in highlighting and in supporting governments to and communities and parents to achieve the right to play? In 3 minutes, Henry.
Yes, thank you so much. I'll give an example of Zambia. I think about 4 years ago, access to early childhood education was around 14%. But through our work of engaging the media, where we were going around the country with civil society organizations to do what we call bus campaigns, where we went to meet district officials, provincial officials, with the media covering what they are promising and what they are talking about. Then after that, we go to the public spaces to talk to the general public about the importance of early childhood education. And those people in those meetings were able to pester the school authorities to ensure that their children have access to early childhood education. You know, we saw an increase from 14% to now about 29%, you know, which is very good. And government was pushed to set up, you know, the Directorate of Directorate of Early Childhood Education, which is running at the Ministry of General Education. So through media, we can create demand for people to be able to pester their leaders or hold their leaders accountable, you know, in order for them to provide early childhood education. Because without media, most of these ideas which you are sharing, you know, on this platform cannot be known by anybody. So if, in fact, if Africa had a global media space where we shared most of these issues, you know, countries can learn from one another, but we normally do get things from other countries, you know, through spaces like this, because we know that institutions like the BBC or CNN cannot share most of these good things. You know, they are always concentrating on bad news and maybe elections. But at the end of the day, as Africans, we need to come up with a strategy to ensure that we start sharing these things. But at national level, the media is influencing demand. The media is making people know that learning through play is a right. It's not just you know, a pastime event. So the media is actually doing a lot in Zambia. And we, my appeal is that we need to come up with a strategy for Africa to have a global media outlet for us to be able to share ideas and ensure that our approaches are continental, and we actually predict a future where Africans are going to have some kind of democratic, innovative, and other aspects that can contribute to our development.
All right, thank you very much, Henry. Really, indeed, media is a critical partner, and we will continue learning from you and really looking at how we can still improve our networks and connections with the media. Now, on your screen is a poll, very short. Please take 2 or 3 seconds of your time. Give us feedback about this webinar, because as I've told you, there is another webinar coming on 2nd and 9th and 16th, and these are going to be very rich with country experiences. Today's webinar was much about sharing a lot of resources from experts so that it can set the pace for the webinars that are coming, very loaded with country experiences. Thank you so much for taking 1 or 2 minutes to just tell us, what do you want us to improve about our webinar so that the webinar for 2nd, 9th, and 16th can be really good. I want to apologize because we've overshot ourselves by about 19 minutes. We really apologize for that. And we promise that in the consecutive webinars, we will try as much as we can to end at the time we have told you, because we appreciate so much your time. Thank you so much, our distinguished panelists, and also our distinguished participants for giving us your time and for sharing. Thank you for the engagements that were moving on at the chat. Thank you to my colleagues that kept you engaged and kept answering your questions. If there is anything that was not answered, please, you could always post to us on email. We are happy to always continue engaging and continue supporting each other and sharing any other resources that we have. I want to really thank you so much. And on behalf of our director, Dr. Lynette Okengo, I want to conclude here and say that at 4:50 sharp, we have ended our webinar. Thank you so much. If you can, please put on your photo and wave at us. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Happy to see you.
Okay, happy to see you too. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.